King in Hiding. Book 1 in the Swayamvara romance series. Written by Anna Bushy. Chapter 1. Lalitha. Princess Lalitha rode along the narrow forest path, her heart hammering against her ribs. The wind rustled against the branches as she and her tired mare advanced slowly in the descending darkness. She'd left her Aunt Chitra's house 2 days ago and had journeyed nearly non-stop since then. Only finding out the fate of her father kept her moving. Something crawled on her back and she nearly screamed. Pressing her lips tightly, she brushed her back to dislodge the insect. Where she headed, she could not be frightened. Lalitha was visiting Aunt Chitra, her mother's sister, when news about a skirmish near Garthapuri reached them. Her aunt had worried for her safety and denied her request to return home. Lalitha had nearly laughed at her aunt's concerns. If King Dushyant invaded her kingdom, she would have no safe haven. She had to protect Garthapuri. Lalitha had written a scroll explaining her decision to seek her father and departed without her aunt's consent. Lalitha had stolen a horse from the stables and had left in the cloak of early dawn. The path narrowed and tree branches scraped her arms. Dewdrops fell from the leaves and wet her cotton sari. She had to find her father. With that thought lighting her path, Lalitha emerged from the cluster of tall trees. She straightened and breathed in the twilight air. She looked at the sky painted in a vibrant shade of orange by the setting sun. The sound of running water reached her and her parched throat burned. She guided her horse toward it. A tiny creek flowed in front, and she jumped off lightly near the shore. Leading her mare to the water, Lalitha knelt beside the animal and drank deeply. She splashed water on her face and washed her arms. After the briefest rest, she mounted the saddle again. A pair of eyes glistened gold in the light. Lalitha pulled her reins to halt the mare. She took out the small knife she'd tucked into her waist. A lone jackal. Her stomach turned at the thought of the beast eating the carcasses of dead soldiers. After watching her warily, the animal abandoned the water and ran into the forest. The mare trudged through the undergrowth while her eyes swept the area. Tree limbs merged with the shadows and scratched her arms. The forest opened up here and sloped down. The warm breeze brought in a decaying odor. Her head jerked up to glimpse the meadow beyond the tree line. She was gazing at the site where the battle had taken place. Fear rose in her throat as Lalitha gazed at the frozen objects on the ground. A large shape that looked like a horse rested next to a shield that glinted faintly in the light. She heard moans and saw a few men moving about the slain warriors. Robbers? Her father might be lying on the ground bleeding to death or worse. She edged forward as the sun sank lower, praying fervently for him. A blinding light appeared in front of her, and her mare reared in fright. Lalitha tried desperately to hold on to the reins, but she had no support. As the horse fell, it was impossible to jump aside. Her arms and legs flailed as the horse's belly flashed above her head. A jerk, a splash into the mud, and then a painful collision with the ground. She remained horrifically paralyzed in fear as a dull ache spread from her right leg.
"Who is it?"
A voice called sharply and she bit her lip. She could not let them find her. She tried to roll, but an excruciating agony stabbed her leg. Her horse wheezed beside her as the animal tried to regain her footing. Light from a flaming torch shone on her. 2 strangers in dirty clothes stood in front of her. The tall man in front eyed her from head to toe. She peeked at him from the corner of her eyes. He appeared only a few summers older than her. Even covered in shadows, she could see he held himself erect like a warrior. But neither wore any insignia. Did they fight for her or King Dushyant?
"Are you hurt?"
He asked, his tone gentle though he towered over her.
"Your light frightened my horse,"
she said as a sudden ache stabbed her. She clenched her fist, waiting for the agony to subside. The tall man knelt beside her.
"Where does it hurt?"
"Curse King Dushyant. My right ankle,"
she gasped as her eyes watered. He froze briefly, and then shifted her sari to expose her lower leg. A bluish bruise started to form around her ankle. He touched her lightly and she nearly yelped.
What are you doing here in the middle of a battle?
Asked his companion, who stood a few feet away. An ugly scar marred his face, and he stood like a tiger ready to pounce on its prey. Lalitha was visiting her aunt to request her to attend the Swayamvara her father had promised to host. Swayamvara allowed a girl to choose her husband. Lalitha knew her father's desire to allow her this choice was rare and spoke of his fondness for his daughter. Most royal women did not even meet their betrothed, let alone select them, before their wedding. Her father had agreed to invite all the eligible young unmarried noblemen from her kingdom to the event, and Lalitha could choose her future groom from among them. When she learned that King Dushyant had attacked her kingdom and that her dear father might be in danger, she left immediately to find him.
My sister is about to give birth. I came to visit her,
Lied Lalitha boldly, reaching into the depth of her heart to find her courage. Raised in the warrior tradition, she would not betray her father by displaying fear.
This place is overrun with men who have fought and killed. It is not safe to travel now.
The tall man answered.
My sister needs my help.
She insisted.
Still, the battlefield is no place for a girl.
He sounded like a man used to command. Who was he?
I heard there was only a skirmish here,
She said, hoping for more details. She'd heard her father had only led a small army to confront that tyrant, Dushyant. The men ignored her words. Instead, the tall man pressed her skin and she grimaced in pain.
We will take you to our hut nearby. You can rest there tonight. Tomorrow, if you are able, I can escort you to your sister.
His eyes gazed at her intently, making her uncomfortable. She was no fool to grab what he offered so readily. She did not trust these men. She could not reveal her destination.
Help me onto my horse and I will find my way home,
She muttered. The tall man shook his head, and his large ears almost flapped like an elephant's.
Did you not hear what I said? You are in the middle of a battle. There are enemy soldiers all over. And you are not fit to fight or flee. You are coming with me.
He said. How dare he insult her? She pulled her knife out.
I can protect myself.
He lifted his brows and knocked the blade out of her hand. She wanted to rip his face. Instead, she gritted her teeth, picked up the weapon and tucked it back into her sari folds. He placed his hands under her knees and waist and scooped her up like a child. Realizing the futility of arguing with him, she shut her eyes. He shifted to clasp her waist tightly, pressing the right side of her chest into his firm body. She sensed him move forward and opened her eyes a slit. His face appeared a mere foot from hers and she flushed.
Are you comfortable?
He asked, though his eyes appeared like a still ocean, conveying no emotions. She nodded, a distinct unease spreading through her at their closeness. His companion guided her mare to him, and the tall man placed her delicately in the saddle, her legs hanging on one side. Then, holding the reins, he walked the horse forward while his companion followed.
The battle. Do you know what happened to Prince Bhimasena?
She whispered, afraid of finding out her father's fate. Did she imagine it, or did the tall man beside her stiffen?
King Dushyant's men captured him.
He said.
Captured?
She asked, with hope rushing in like a flash flood.
Yes?
He answered, shifting slightly. Her father was her only family since her mother abandoned her. Her mother, Princess Charulata, had renounced her worldly ties and joined a Buddhist monastery a few years ago. The thought of also losing her father crushed Lalitha. Thankfully, he was alive. Lalitha pressed her right thumb into her left wrist, releasing the tense knot. She had to rescue him from the clutches of the tyrant king.
Was he wounded?
He is a valuable prisoner. King Dushyant will treat him well.
Valuable? She nearly snorted. Her father would say a plate of rice had more value than him. Why hadn't her uncle, King Sumrut, sent men to free him? When a messenger arrived a week ago with the note that Dushyant's army marched toward Garthapuri, she wanted to return home immediately. After she'd unsuccessfully pleaded with her aunt to let her go, she slipped away. She noticed the tall man glance at her frequently. Heat rose in her cheeks at his unwanted attention. Who did he think he was?
Did you fight for Prince Bhimasena?
She asked.
My cousin and I are ordinary men.
He replied. She observed his pattern of not answering her question. The scars on his face and arms told her that he'd fought. But she had more important things on her mind than figuring out their names. With her father captured and her uncle apparently oblivious to his fate, she wanted to slice King Dushyant to pieces.
Is King Dushyant here?
She asked. The tall man appeared taken aback, and the tip of his ear turned red. She saw a glance pass between the two men. Then the tall man shook his head. The king destroyed her father's army, and he was not even here to savor his victory. Rage coursed through her when she imagined the brave men who had died for her father. She would visit their families when she returned to Garthapuri to thank them. And she wanted King Dushyant to inflict no more harm on her kingdom. She had to chase the king away or bargain with him. But she had nothing to offer him. While her uncle sat on the throne, her father ruled Garthapuri. With her father detained, she had to return to the palace and plan a way to get him out. Her kingdom needed her. Darkness descended around them, and the earth blended with the sky. A small hut loomed in front. The tall man halted the horse, and his eyes glinted in the moonlight. While his cousin held the door open, he carried her inside, heat from his palm spreading to her back. He lowered her to a mat. She slid toward the mud wall and leaned against it. The tiny room held only the mat, a lighted oil wick lantern, and a pot of water. He left her side and went outside to talk to his cousin. Though she could not hear them, she could sense from their arm gestures that they were arguing about something. After a while, his cousin departed with the flaming torch, and the tall man entered the hut.
My cousin left to fetch you food and something to ease your pain.
You don't need to stay here.
She mumbled, feeling trapped by his presence.
I cannot leave you alone,
He said, dropping to the floor.
Why? I am not going anywhere with my injured leg.
He gazed at her, tugging his ear.
to protect you. How long will you lie?
She stared at him with her stomach twisted in fear.
Princess Lalitha.
He stated coldly.